And with that, I will ask you to please join me in giving Attorney General Ferguson a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Dr. Dondish, for that very kind introduction. First thing I just want to get straight is he mentioned that Time Magazine 100 Most Influential People in the World award that I received last year. I'm from a family of seven kids, big Catholic family. There's 6 boys, 1 long-suffering sister in my family. And so one of my older brothers called me after Time Magazine announced this 100 Most Influential People in the World thing, and he called me up. He said, "Bob, congratulations," but he said, "It's quite a promotion because you're not even the most influential person in our family." So that's that's the treatment I get back at home with my siblings. And Dr. Dondish and I were chatting with some students in a waiting room, and we actually were not talking about deep issues related to immigration. We were talking about a big soccer match last night. The Seattle Sounders were playing a big club from Mexico, Chivas, as you may have seen. And I did take the moment to remind Dr. Dondish the Sounders won 1-0. I did point that, but I didn't gloat too much because they have a return match, which is in Mexico next week. And I'm a big Sounders fan, but I'm not sure how optimistic I am. But it's great to see you again, and thank you for being here. It's actually great to be here because this is one of the last things I get to do before my wife, Colleen. We have 10-year-old twins, and my wife's about to, she's a graduate of UPS, and she's leaving in a few hours to go to Hawaii with her mother and her one sibling, her sister, for a well-deserved week, away from home and her responsibilities here. So she's put aside her career in higher education to raise our children. So I did say to my son Jack the other night, I said to Jack, Mom's leaving for a week. How do you feel about that? I'll be here to take care of you. How you feel about that? He said, "Daddy, I think things could fall apart." So that's so this is the last you may see of me for a while. We'll try not to burn the house down in the next week. So it's great to be here with you and chat to help get this symposium going. And I have a confession to make right away. I am not an expert on immigration issues. You will get to hear from many experts here in the next couple days. That's not me. But I can speak, I think, to really what you mentioned, which is the intersection of the rule of law with policies set by our government, by our presidents, and the impact those policies have on immigration, on people, on their stories. And so there's a certain maybe practical application in the real world that, I have spent a fair amount of time grappling with over the course of the last year. In fact, I think it's probably fair to say, I have a busy job with the work that I do, but issues in the last year with this administration have been a focus. There's no two ways around that. And in the last year, my office has filed, I think it's 21 lawsuits against the Trump administration. That's a lot of litigation. And thanks. And I will speak about 2 of those that relate to immigration. The first, travel ban, which of course was executed just a little over a year ago now. And that was the first legal challenge to the president by a state, of course. And then the rescission of Daca, protections for dreamers in our state, in our country, in which we filed a lawsuit challenging that as well. So, what I'll speak to a bit is, and I hope this is helpful and interesting, a bit about, again, the practical side of that. A big part of how we develop our lawsuit, stories we tell in those lawsuits, which as I tell my team all the time, and I'll speak a bit more later on, is it is very important to tell a story in our litigation, in every lawsuit. We're wired to think in terms of stories. I read stories to my kids every night. Currently working on Tom Sawyer. There's still hope, right? The classics kids are still interested in those, right? And but we're wired, right, to tell stories and to think in terms of stories. And that's an important part of the work that we do. So when it comes to those cases, I'll give some examples of the stories we're telling that speak to the experience of immigrants in our country or who wish to come to our country as well. And for what it's worth, in those 21 lawsuits, 5 of those cases have been decided. There's no more appeals. We have won all 5 of those cases, and that include the first travel ban. And so we've had success by telling these stories and using the rule of law. Because everybody, and this is just to set the stage, is the reason I went to law school many reasons, but the key one is that, the law is such a powerful tool. Everybody's accountable to the rule of law. Everybody is. You are, I am, the president is, right? And so in enacting these policies, I'm thankful that we live in a country where the rule of law still holds, right? That those institutions, in my mind, are more powerful than any individual, even the president. And so maybe I'll start with that first travel ban, which when it was first executed a little over a year ago, it was shortly after the president had been sworn into office. And his travel ban, as you know, stated that for 7 Muslim-majority countries, it denied the ability of folks from those countries to come to the United States. It also, of course, impacted individuals from our state, living in our state, who may have been abroad to return to our state if they happen to be from those countries. And so the travel ban was signed on a Friday night. And our team, after Donald Trump had been elected president, we began having conversations about what his administration might look like, what things he talked about during his campaign that if he actually enacted, we would want to look at from a legal standpoint and consider a challenge. And one of those we looked at was a potential travel ban because, as you recall, when he ran for president, he called for, in his words, a complete and total shutdown of Muslims coming into the United States. You talk about the immigrant experience, focused on a religion, people of a certain faith saying, no, they are not allowed to come to our country, period. That was a big part of his campaign. I mean, it was an applause line during his campaign stump speeches. He used it frequently. It was on his website. And so that was one that we looked at from his campaign, thought, well, hey, what if he actually tries to implement that? Now, a lot of people thought, oh, he's not. Remember back then, people thought, well, he campaigned a certain way. He won't really govern that way. That's just what he said to speak to his base. I mean, you remember those days? That really was, a lot of people thought that, right? He won't really do it. He won't, same with Dreamers. He won't really do it. I guess I have to tell you that I did not feel that way. I did not anticipate he'd be elected president. Once he was elected president, I told myself I would not underestimate him again. Underestimate in the sense of if he said he's going to do something, run for president, hey, I didn't think he'd win. He did win. Well, I decided, well, maybe he's serious about what he said during his campaign. He'll actually try to enact it. So my team knew if he enacted a Muslim travel ban, we're going to work on it right away. We're not messing around. We're going to work on it right away. We're not waiting until the next business day. We're going to work on it right away. So by Saturday morning, everybody's at the office working that weekend. Everybody's there. People have left their vacations. They're there. They're working. And so, from just a practical standpoint on, making that decision, your time was of the essence because the travel ban, when it went into effect immediately. There was no preparation. He signed it. That meant if you were on a plane, right, trying to return to Washington State, and you're from one of those 7 affected countries, you were not returning to Washington State. And so during that weekend, we were starting to accumulate stories. And we reached out to many individuals and institutions, but institutions of higher education played a key role in declarations that we submitted to the court. We filed our lawsuit on Monday, by the way. And it's another speech to tell you about how the hell my team put together a multi-100-page document, legal arguments, declarations, everything in less than 72 hours. I'll tell that story some other time, but I mean, those guys really, it's incredible what they put together and got that thing filed. But a key part that we decided early, and I think one reason we were successful is we want to tell some stories. Let's tell some stories. And one of those stories was who is impacted by this? We had many. I'll just give you a couple examples. So from our declarations, we mentioned that at the University of Washington, one graduate teaching assistant, this is a graduate teaching assistant at the University of Washington, right, employed there, living here, was traveling abroad when the executive order was signed. That individual was denied re-entry back into the United States. Living here, working here at our institutions of higher education. Washington State University had a faculty member who was from an affected country. She'd traveled to Germany to defend her PhD at another university. Wasn't allowed to return. We've got a lot more. So putting those stories in front of the court was important to us. It was also important to tell stories of individuals who had gone through a process that our country had set up to get the visas, to come to our country, to be reunited, for example, with family members. We told those stories as well. Alan Novak, I went out to SeaTac Airport after we'd stopped the travel ban and to meet an individual who was allowed back in. While I was there, There's a gentleman there with his family. He came over to me. He said, hey, you know, are you Bob Ferguson? I said, yeah. He said, well, you want to thank me for the work we've done. His name's Alan Novak. He's a dentist from Iran. He'd been trying to travel with his daughter back to the United States to be reunited with his wife, who's a nurse in Silverdale. He'd been denied re-entry back into our country. So when you talk about this experience, you're talking about families being divided, right? You're talking about folks from our country not being allowed back in, or folks who'd gone through a lengthy process, played by the rules, and were suddenly and arbitrarily denied the ability to come to the United States. Other stories we told, by the way, and I won't spend too much time on this, but we want to tell the stories of individuals. We told the stories of companies. That weekend, I called up corporate counsel for Amazon and Expedia and said, hey, I'm going to file a lawsuit against the president, and here's the topic. And it was an interesting conversation. And I mean, to tell you the story a little more, it was Sunday morning. We thought it'd be helpful to have businesses file declarations on the impact to them and their businesses. And so literally on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, I called up corporate counsel for Amazon, a fellow I know well. I think he was probably surprised to get a phone call from me on a Sunday morning. But I said, hey, we're going to file this lawsuit. He said, when? I said, you know, tomorrow. And I wanted to have them tell their story of the impact to them as a business on being able to recruit individuals, right, from other countries who are so pivotal to the success of their business. And to the great credit of Amazon and Expedia, they both signed declarations making that point, the impact on them as a business, on individuals who work for them, their ability to draw talent from around the world who can come and immigrate and come to our country and further strengthen our country with their diversity of talents and abilities and all that comes with that. That's a story we told. We also told a story on national security. The president, of course, said, oh, this is all for national security, which is why, by the way, the travel ban was popular when it was first signed. It was popular nationwide. The polls showed it was popular. And he said it's national security. Well, we wanted to rebut that story. It's beyond the scope maybe of this talk, but it's worth pointing out that when we were before the court, we had declarations signed by national security experts. Yes, some of those are folks who worked for Democratic presidents, but we also had the CIA director for George W. Bush, who signed a declaration not just saying that the travel ban wasn't going to help with national security, he signed a declaration saying the travel ban would hurt national security. So my point here is that in the work that I do and in responding to what's happening at that national level is telling these stories is important. In fact, it's critical to the success that we have and framing this in the experience of, candidly, immigrants, folks who have come to our country or wish to come to our country and telling those stories to the judge. And, you know, I guess one more thing I'll say about the travel ban is, you know, those stories can have an impact, you know, in many ways, and I'll just give you an example. It was shortly after we stopped the travel ban. So it was signed on a Friday. We filed our lawsuit Monday. The judge, our judge, who was appointed by George Bush, by the way, George W. Bush was the judge we got. And on Friday, we were before that judge, Judge Robart, asking to put a stop to the travel ban. And the judge agreed with our argument. And so that's what put a stop to it nationwide. So after that, we began, in my office, we started to get letters from people around the state, around the country, and really around the world. And I remember the first day they came in, my executive assistant said, hey, Bob, you've got a bunch of letters. And many of them were handwritten. You know, who writes handwritten letters anymore? It's kind of a lost art, right? Who writes a handwritten letter? And so I thought, well, that's nice that some people wrote. I said, well, hey, Judy, if someone writes from Washington State, they handwrite a letter, I'll handwrite a quick note back. And the reason I said that was because people were writing in deeply personal ways. Hey, I was born in a Japanese internment camp. Here's what this means to me, right? My relatives were in Nazi Germany. My Jewish ancestors were in Nazi Germany. They were trying to get out of Nazi Germany to get to the United States. Immigrant story. Were not allowed. Or, thank God, some were allowed, but some were not. And these were the impacts on my family because of that, and I don't think this travel ban is a good idea as a result. Right? That these were what people were writing letters to me about, handwritten letters. So I thought, well, I'll write a quick note back. So I thought there'd be 30 or 40 of these letters. I mean, there were thousands of them. There were thousands of them. So, but once I start a project, I want to finish it. So I'm going through, and we have this whole system for me writing these response letters just from Washington State, handwritten letters, right? It becomes a big project. And I begin taking the letters home at night because I can't get them done in the evening at work. And so we have our children, who are 9 at the time, Jack and Katie, maybe even 8 at the time, I guess. And they don't know much about what's going on. I'm gone a lot from work because work's really busy at that time, but we're not explaining to them the travel ban or immigrant story. We're just not, they're young, they're kids. And so I think I might have underestimated them, by the way, but we hadn't said much other than when they asked why I was gone so much. I just said, look, kids, the president did a bad thing and daddy's trying to stop him. That was literally, that was literally, I really didn't mean it to be funny, but every time I tell that, everybody laughs. So, but that is literally what we told the kids. I said, yeah. And, but that was the limit of what we told the kids. And so, but one night I was home, Katie, my daughter's doing her homework next to me. I'm doing my letters, and I started getting letters from kids from the 7 affected countries, right? So clearly their parents obviously encouraged them to write letters to me. They were very young children. And so I had some of these letters, and one of them I was working on, and it's in a kid's handwriting. It's obviously a child Katie's age, 8 years old or so. The girl happened to be from Iraq. In which she'd drawn this big picture of me, which was really funny as well, and she wrote this note about how this had affected her. And I remember she wrote really the most beautiful thing somebody could write. She wrote, "Because you stood up, I can be here," which is really the power of the rule of law, right? Because you stood up, I can be here. And so I'm responding to this girl, and Katie says, "Hey, Daddy, what's that? What are you working on?" Because she sees this crazy picture of me, right, in this cape, and it's kind of a funny picture. And I said, well, I got this letter from this girl. And so Katie, of course, is wondering, why is a child her age writing to her daddy, right, about work? That doesn't make much sense. So she said, well, what's she writing about? And so I started to have a conversation with her about the letter and about the travel ban, about what it meant. And it was fascinating, the power of stories, right, and the immigrant experience, that Katie could see the issue through the lens of another child her age, right? I mean, yes, the letter was written to me, but it's written as an 8-year-old it could have been to Katie, right? And so, Katie became really interested. Well, what's up with that policy? Why can't she, was she really away? And I didn't know, the letter wasn't clear. Was she already here? It wasn't clear, it meant a lot to her stopping the travel ban. And so Katie said, well, why are you writing back to her? And I said, well, it's polite, right? If grandma gives you a present for Christmas, you write her a note, a thank you note, it's polite. So Katie said, God bless her, she said, well, can I write her a note too? So on my letter, Katie draws a picture of an owl or a horse or a butterfly. She likes drawing pictures, and she wrote her own note to this child. Katie has met that child now, right? I mean, Katie's met that child. So, it's a reminder of how powerful stories are, the immigrant experiences, and what that means for us as a people. I guess I'll just mention one more thing before taking a few of your questions, and that is that, the other case we got very involved in, of the many, but relating to immigration, is, of course, the case related to the rescission of Daca, the protections for dreamers. Of course, as you know, we have about 800,000 dreamers in our country, about 18,000 dreamers here in the state of Washington, of which I've met many in the past year or so. These are individuals who came to our country through no fault of their own as children, right? Their parents came here illegally, and they brought their children with them. And the president announced several months ago that he would rescind the protections for dreamers put in place by the Obama administration. Now, look, there's a lot to unpack with that. I'll be relatively brief, but I think a couple things are worth pointing out. And this also goes to that in our lawsuits, yes, there's important issues related to the Constitution in all of our cases, right? I mean, there's a reason why that first travel ban is taught in that case is taught in law schools already. Limits of presidential authority. There's all sorts of important legal principles there. But there are also, I think, important principles of who we are as a people, and what that means for the immigrant experience in our country as well. And the Daca case, I think, is a good example, because in order to become a dreamer, the first thing you've got to do is you have to come out of the shadows, right? That's the first step. You have to tell the federal government, the entity that can deport you, right? You've got to tell the federal government who you are, where you live, where you go to school, where you work, who your family members are. They may or may not be documented. You got to do that. Step one, before you even get to all the other steps you've got to do to qualify to become a dreamer, which are extensive, of course, right? But that's the first thing you've got to do, is come out of the shadows. Well, in order to encourage folks to do that, to qualify for the Daca program, the federal government made a promise, very reasonable one. If you do that, we will not use that information against you to deport you. Pretty reasonable, right? We want to encourage folks to do it, but who's going to do it if that information might get used to deport them? Nobody. So the federal government made that promise. In fact, they put that promise on the federal government's webpage related to the Daca program. They have a FAQ, a frequently asked questions. And one of the questions is, will this information I'm providing to the federal government be used against me, to deport me? Answer on the website, nope, we're not going to do that. Now, on the day that the President and the U.S. Attorney General announced the rescission of the Daca program, that question and that answer were removed from that website. And now look, I could talk to you all day about our legal arguments in that case, but fundamentally, I think the case is in many respects about who we are as a people, with folks who, in this instance, came to our country as children through no fault of their own, right? That's who we're talking about, a large number of them, 800,000, and that our government made a deal with them. And a deal on a pretty important topic, right? Where they're going to live. Will they be forced to go back to a country they do not know, right? Trust me, these dreamers are every bit as American as my children, Jack and Katie. Take my word for it, if you have many dreamers, and you probably have, right? Take my word for it. But this idea that we would go back on that deal, set aside the legal issues, that to me, it's outrageous. If my son Jack comes to me and says, hey, Daddy, I traded one of my Pokemon cards to my friend Elliot, and I've realized now, Dad, that I traded a valuable Pokemon card for one that's not very important. I made a bad deal, Dad. And if he said to me, Dad, we need to go up to Elliot's house and get my card back. We need to undo that deal. What am I going to say to the kid? No, I'm sorry, son, that's not how it works. You made a deal. You may not like the deal now. You may change your mind about the deal. You may have new information. Who knows why? But you don't get to take your deal back. You made a deal. You've got to stick to it. That's how it works. It's as basic and fundamental a principle as we have in this country. Every parent teaches that to their kid at a young age. Everyone. But our country is not going to live up to that deal. And we're not talking Pokemon cards, are we? Right? We're not talking Pokemon cards, for God's sakes. Being deported back to a country you do not know when you've lived here your whole life, working, going to school, living the American dream, it makes no damn sense. It doesn't. Now, what I need to do is take my anger and my frustration with that policy, right, and carve it into a legal argument. That's what I need to do. If there's not a good legal argument, I'm not doing it. There's a reason why we haven't lost a case yet. We try to be thoughtful about the cases we bring. However, there are legal components to these issues. Due process, right? Equal protection. There are all sorts of, we have a constitution for a reason, that rule of law. We can frame those stories and make legal arguments and tell those stories to a court, and so far we've had success in doing that. And so it's, in conclusion on at least on these remarks is, so I have spent a lot of time thinking about issues related to immigration through that lens, or what I would consider a practical or a legal lens, interacting with lots of folks who've shared their stories, from them, their own stories individually or their family stories. Many of those have come, as I said, through letters that were written from that first travel ban. And so it's, I'm glad we're having a symposium on this topic that the university is, because it is so important right now. We'd be hard pressed to find a more important topic, a more consequential topic for us right now. And so I tend to be an optimist by nature. While I obviously have challenges with this administration and how they conduct themselves on many levels, I remain an optimist because I think our institutions, the rule of law, I think are more powerful than any one person. In a courtroom, it's not the loudest voice that prevails. It's the Constitution. That's what prevails in a courtroom. Federal judge does not care how loud your voice is in a courtroom. They really don't. You can't tweet your way out of a problem in a federal courtroom. Take my word for it. It doesn't work, right? It doesn't work. All that a judge is focused on are the facts to your case and the law and the Constitution. That's the focus, and that's the power that comes from the law. But what breathes power into that, of course, are these stories, right? The real-life experiences, the stories, the human experiences of individuals that make that Constitution, that make that rule of law real for our judges and for our society as a whole. Thanks so much, and I look forward to any questions you might have. Thank you. Thanks again. I think someone's got a microphone maybe. Is that how we're doing it?
Thank you so much for this fantastic talk and for being here on campus today. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your lawsuit against the Northwest Detention Center here in Tacoma.
Sure.
How you have gone about building that case, what issues are at stake, and how that is progressing.
Sure, thanks because I had a couple other cases I just, in the interest of time, didn't get to. That was one I jotted down, so thanks for asking about it. The Northwest Detention Center, as you know, here located here in Tacoma, it houses up to, I'll just give you a little background on the for those who may not be as familiar, it houses up to about 1,500 detainees who are there for immigration issues. It is not a criminal facility. I want to be clear about this. Folks are not charged with criminal offenses there, but it's up to 1,500 folks are there who face immigration proceedings. It is not run by the state or the city or a county. It's run by a for-profit corporation, Geo Corporation's name. I think they're based out of Florida, but it's a for-profit corporation, runs the detention facility in a contract they have with the federal government. They run a number of them around the country. So look, there are many issues or potential issues related to the detention facility. What I can speak to is what you asked about, which is a lawsuit that I filed against Geo Corporation that runs the facility. And so I asked my team, I guess I'm losing track of time, it might have been a year or so ago, to just look into issues there. My civil rights team, I created a civil rights unit in the office. And there have been lawsuits related to conditions at these facilities around the country. And what my team came back to me with was interesting, I thought. They, in interviewing folks who were detained at the facility, and by the way, there are many folks who are detained there who then are released back into our community because they can be here legally. I just want to be clear. It's not like everybody gets deported, right? There are folks who are detained who then go through their proceedings and they're allowed to stay in our state and in our communities. And so my team discovered that Geo Corporation, big corporation, they make a lot of money at the detention facility. They, outside of their guards, for example, most of the work that is done at the facility is done by the detainees. Cleanup, kitchen, you get the idea. Detainees do that work. They're not hiring folks from the community to do it. Detainees do much of the work to run the facility. What we found interesting was how much they were paid for that. $1 a day. Not $1 an hour, right? $1 a day. Sometimes they weren't paid that. They were paid in terms of snacks. But $1 a day is the going rate apparently there, which my team found concerning, particularly because in our state we have a minimum wage. Now there are exceptions to the minimum wage in our state. If, for example, it is a state-run jail, right, or prison, right, you can have, if a state is running an institution like that, you do not have to pay the minimum wage. But there is no exception. There are very few exceptions to our minimum wage. There is not an exception when we looked at the law for a private corporation that has a detention facility. They're a for-profit entity. It's not the state. So it's our view that, well, great if they want to have detainees do work there, but you got to pay the minimum wage. That's how it works in our state. You got to play by the rules. So it's a big case. This conduct has gone on for years. So there's a lot at stake for Geo, for the detainees, and from the state's perspective. I mean, it's a multi-million-dollar case, to put it mildly. So we filed that case. It's working its way through the system. So these cases, the only challenge with the travel ban is, after it was signed, a week later we'd put a stop to it. And I think the rule of law is a powerful thing, but sometimes it takes time. You don't always stop something in a week. That's unusual, to put it mildly. And so most of our cases, you file them and they go through a lengthy process. This one will be no different. Geo Corporation is resisting it, of course, not surprisingly. But my civil rights team is focused on this case, and we are optimistic in terms of how it's going to turn out. But by the way, I should mention that we work closely with an organization called the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. Jorge Baron's the executive director there. A fantastic organization, tremendous resource for detainees who are there. We just work so closely with my team, and we work so closely with Jorge and his team. His team's fantastic. So if you ever come across folks who have issues, immigration-related issues, Jorge Baron, Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, just really a great group, and I'd encourage you to refer folks there if they've got issues related to this type of thing.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to ask you about what happened in California yesterday with Jeff Sessions and what the implications for Washington might be.
Yeah, so referring to, of course, the lawsuit filed by the federal government against the state of Washington related to did I say state of Washington? Excuse me. The federal government filed, hopefully they haven't filed against the state of Washington, filed against the state of California, related to California being, a sanctuary state, essentially, and what the implications are for that. I've not read the complaint yet, so I just want to be upfront about it. I've read news articles, I've talked to my team, obviously, but so I'll keep it at a relatively high level, but I think I can answer your question in some detail. First, it's just interesting to me that the federal government is sort of going on the offensive now, just for what that's worth. That's just interesting. They've been sued a lot by myself and other Democratic AGs. Now they're going on the offensive for what I think is really sort of the first time on one of these issues. So that itself is interesting to me. In terms of what it might mean for Washington or jurisdictions in Washington, I have a few thoughts. So one is, Washington State, unlike California, I'm confident that I'm right about this, is not a sanctuary state in the way that California is, okay? That said, we have a number of sanctuary jurisdictions, cities and counties. Now keep in mind, what is a sanctuary city in one city may be very different than a sanctuary city somewhere else. It's not a cookie-cutter system, right? These are complicated, and what their policies are can be very different from one sanctuary city to another. But given those differences, we have a number in Washington State. So, could there be implications from a lawsuit against the state of California for their policies that, if successful by the federal government, could have an impact on other sanctuary jurisdictions around the country? Yes. But it's, I don't want to, I'm getting way ahead of myself on that, right? But of course, any case that would be related to this topic, whatever the outcome is, could have an impact. That'd be number one. Number two, and the California case, by the way, it's in our circuit. While it'll be a different judge in California looking at it, when it goes up on appeal, if it does, they're going to be in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. We're in the Ninth Circuit, so it's in our area, so to speak, right? That case goes up on appeal. One thing I'll say about, so too soon to say anything too much more beyond that, and I do not represent cities or counties. That's not my role as Attorney General. They have their own city attorney or county prosecutor who's their law firm. That said, I have conversations with local leaders about these issues, and one area that we have engaged, and I'll be watching this closely in relation to that lawsuit, is that one thing I heard as I've traveled the state, red counties, blue counties, is feedback from individuals, local law enforcement, community members about the following. Hey, Bob, what are we as a public institution, what are we required to provide to ICE? What information must we give to ICE? And what information do we not have to give to ICE, right? How much do we have to cooperate legally? Where do we have flexibility to make our decisions as we think appropriate for our community? And I think that's an important question, this issue of sanctuary cities, right? Immigration enforcement is a federal job. It's not the job of local law enforcement, but sometimes there can be gray areas on how much a local jurisdiction must cooperate. So what my civil rights team did was we put together, it's a lengthy document, it's 150 pages if not more, of essentially a legal analysis for public institutions. It could be a school. If an ICE agent shows up at your school and wants information about a kid there, what's the principal got to do? Do they need a warrant for that information? Important question. So my team put together a lengthy document that outlined what we believe to be the law in this area. What must a public entity like that provide to ICE? When must ICE have a warrant? You get the idea. Let's try and answer these questions. And then jurisdictions and public institutions can decide for themselves what's best for them. So we put that out there. That was controversial. We did that last year. A lot of folks felt that, hey, Bob, you are somehow trying to enable institutions to be sanctuary cities and give them guidelines for how to avoid cooperating with the federal government. I guess I looked at it a little bit differently. We're giving legal analysis, so what might be right in one jurisdiction might not be right for a different jurisdiction. But the key is they have the information and they decide what's best, and the people help decide that, obviously, right? While many people have been critical of that guidance, no one has questioned the legal analysis in it, which, as the lawyer for the state, that's what I focus on, right? And so that's a resource for folks to utilize that we think is a good one. And again, my role there is trying to give guidance to jurisdictions so they can choose what's best for them. So I will be interested as this case goes forward. I haven't had a chance to look at it, see, hey, is there an intersection between what we're putting into our document that intersects with this lawsuit and what's being alleged and how the state of California responds? But I don't know the details yet to tell you a whole lot more on that end.
So, like other Ethiopians in the greater Seattle area, I came to the US through a diversity visa, and I was wondering what you would have to say about Trump canceling it. I think that's what I heard.
So I'm not sure if I know that one specifically. And my team in my office would know very well, I'm quite sure. And so my team looks closely at what I can say is any action taken by the administration related to communities in the state, they are watching very closely. So you could contact our office, I could take your information and get back to you on that. I just don't know the answer offhand, but I can assure you without beyond a shadow of a doubt that something like that's going on. My team is acutely aware of it and would be examining it. And just to take it, pull the lens back a little bit, I mean, sometimes folks are curious, well, how do we decide what we file a lawsuit on or what we focus on? Look, I mean, every day I'm having some conversations about the administration, actions they're taking, decisions they're making, right? There is a formal weekly meeting that we have as a team with all the lawyers and staff who are deeply involved in these issues, in which we go through all our litigation, potential litigation, issues that are out there. They bring them to my attention. My job, of course, is to give guidance to my team of what we're going to focus on, right? And I mean, I can tell you the test I have for whether or not to initiate litigation, it's pretty simple. It goes back to that first travel ban conversation I had with Noah Purcell, my Solicitor General, that first weekend of the travel ban, and the questions I asked him were, and the questions I asked for any cases, are Washingtonians being impacted? Well, Dreamer's case or travel ban, it's pretty straightforward, right? People are being impacted. In some cases, though, it can be a little more nebulous. It's not always so clear. Do we have good legal arguments? Right, to that point earlier. I've got to have a good case, right? The rule of law is great, but you got to have arguments that you can make to a court and be persuasive to be successful. Do we have good legal arguments? And can I, as Attorney General, bring the lawsuit? I'll spare you the details, but do I have standing to bring the lawsuit? So take the travel ban situation. Hey, those two individuals I talked about, Washingtonians who are abroad trying to come back and denied return to their state, they clearly could bring a lawsuit because they're directly impacted by that decision, right? They can't come back to the state of Washington. It's not always clear whether an attorney general can bring a lawsuit on behalf of people in the state in this context. Again, I won't go into the details of that, but that's an important analysis for us to look at is, can I bring the lawsuit as attorney general on behalf of the people of the state? But if the answer to those three questions are yes, yes, and yes, Washingtonians are being harmed, we think we have good legal arguments, and we think I as attorney general can bring it, you know, then I'm interested. And in fact, what I would even say is that on that first travel ban, you know, when we filed that lawsuit on Monday, we'd reached out to states all around the country, Democratic AGs, to see if they want to join our lawsuit. Now, we were moving fast, right? And it was the first one. But I can tell you how many AGs joined us when we filed our complaint. Zero. Now, they eventually came on board, Maine, which I really appreciate, and it's not a criticism, right? We were moving very, very quickly, but to me, it's, yes, the law is complicated, and yes, my job in certain ways is complicated, but really, and what I tell my team, in a way, my job is very, very simple, right? I try not to overthink it. These are the three questions I ask. Are Washingtonians being harmed? Do we have good legal arguments? Can I bring the lawsuit? If the answers are yes, why am I not filing the lawsuit? Now, there may be lots of interesting questions, which, believe me, I thought to myself that first weekend. Well, back then, legal experts said a lawsuit will never work. If you turned on Anderson Cooper that weekend and listened to Jeffrey Toobin or Professor Dershowitz, they all said the same thing. A lawsuit won't work, the president has too much authority, AGs don't have standing. That was the conventional wisdom. We thought differently, okay, but I was aware of the fact that if I filed the lawsuit, people would say it's political, and if Judge Robart kicked it out because I did not have standing or did not like my legal arguments, and he is a plain-spoken judge, by the way, okay, if he did those things, that's a bad day at the office. Right? Right? It's not a good look for our office, right? I'm representing the people on this, right? That's not going to make it easier for the next AG to challenge the president. There's a lot at stake, right? Resources in my office. I'm asking my team to work around the clock for weeks to put this thing together and do the appeal, right? There's resources. Well, those are interesting questions, but are they really relevant to the decision? I don't think so, right? And so from many respects, I keep it relatively simple and focus on those three questions, and so far I think that's guided us pretty well. One more question? Is that right? One more question?
Sorry. Thank you so much for being here with us today,
Sure.
and just the straightforward, clear way you live your life. I appreciate it deeply. I'm interested if there's a bigger picture, since this is a national and international problem. If you see where the AGs were when you did this lawsuit and what the AGs in the country are talking about now, do you see any new trends? Do you see any kind of things that you're thinking about as we go into the future?
On issues related specifically to immigration or
Yeah,
other issues?
on
or?
immigration and just the presidential power getting exerted in ways that seem to overstate what that should be. But immigration specifically, since that's what we're here for today.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting question. It's, I mean, just being perfectly honest, my days are very full with kind of what's right in front of me, right? What's right in front of me. I mean, it's all I can do to keep up, right, with what's right in front of me. And my 10-year-old twins, right? I mean, that's and so while I sometimes at night think about that a bit, you know, I don't have a whole lot of time to ponder kind of long-term implications so much. I mean, I wish I could tell you that something different, but what I can say is that, how about let me answer it this way. When we first filed that first travel ban case, on that day, that Saturday, when I made that decision, if you told me then we would file 20 more lawsuits in the next year against the president, I would have said, that's crazy. That's crazy talk. That's not even possible. It's not in the realm. It was not even in my, I can't tell you how far away from what I was thinking that would have been, okay? It's just, we're all in on this one thing. And so one thing I've discovered through this past year and working with my colleagues around the country is to essentially expect the unexpected with the administration, right? And that to try and predict it is impossible. That's my experience. Now, we try to take certain clues of what he said, like on the Daca litigation. He made it on Dreamers. We had concerns about things he was saying about Dreamers and immigrants and individuals from Mexico. We had concerns, which is why the day after he announced it, we were able to file our lawsuit with other AGs. As a group of AGs doing it the very next day. The team was ready. We'd prepared our complaint. We weren't, we're not messing around. We're ready to go. So there are some exceptions where we can anticipate. But I'd say, as a general matter, no, I don't think we really can. And I'm just not able to spend a whole lot of time thinking about it. That said, you know, it would not shock me if there are another 20 lawsuits in the course of the next year. It would not surprise me if there are more issues related to immigration. It just wouldn't. I mean, I've stopped trying to predict it in a certain sense. The last thing I just will say is that what I can tell you is that, from my standpoint, is that, I think the doctor mentioned this earlier on, that I used to play a lot of chess, right? And chess was a very important part of my life. After I finished high school, I did not go to college right away and try to become a professional chess player in Europe. It's a long story. I'll spare you the details. My parents were very, very worried. But chess teaches you many things. And I'll just conclude with this thought. Chess teaches you many things. But your whole goal, if we're playing a game of chess, my whole focus is trying to anticipate your next move. That's all I'm thinking about. I mean, obviously I'm thinking what I'm going to do, but I have to put myself in her shoes at that chessboard, and I have to be completely objective about it. If you lose your objectivity in a chess game, forget about it. If you make a move I don't anticipate, or that I didn't think about, or I saw the move but I did not understand the reasoning once you made it, that's a problem. It's a big problem. If I'm playing well, I literally, every move she makes, I'm like, yep, I knew knight c7 was coming, and I'm ready for my move. Yep, I knew rook e8. Yep, that's what I thought. That's what you want. That's the ideal. Now, look, obviously you're playing good players. Chess teaches you it's a valuable thing. You're putting all your efforts in this, but your opponents can still surprise you with moves, okay? Now, I have to tell you that in Washington State, there's an opponent I had who I had the most trouble with. His name's Victor's Pupils. He's a guy from Latvia. He's won the state championship many times. I've played him many, many times. He's beaten U.S. champions. He's a fantastic chess player. And we were still we're even in strength, but the damn problem I had with Victor's Pupils, which aggravates me this day, is the guy was wildly unpredictable, okay? He had a certain style. It's hard to put into words to take his style, but he just saw the game in a completely different way than I did. And most chess players in our state, by the way, and around the country. It's why he could beat the top players in the country. He had a very unconventional approach to the game. Now, that could be a strength because he's making moves that are throwing you off. Whoa, holy crap, where'd he come up with that move? What's he trying to do? And one thing I learned is, I think one of the reasons it took me a while, as I got older, I started playing him when I was probably 12 or 13, I had more success as I got older because I think I matured, number one, and I did not, when he made an unexpected move, I didn't get stressed out about it. Like, I began to anticipate the unexpected move and just said, well, I'm just going to be comfortable. He's going to do this to me, and I'm just going to roll with it. I'm not going to get stressed out. It's going to happen. Deal with that calmly, objectively, right? So in a lot of ways, it's kind of how I think about the Trump administration, right? I mean, it really is. He's going to do things I just do not anticipate, okay? And I'm just going to try to be objective about that, and we have our weekly conversation. We're just going to talk about the law and the impact on Washingtonians, and can I bring the lawsuit? And just, if you were to listen to those conversations, people aren't ripping on Donald Trump. That's not what's going on. It's just a conversation about the law. That's what we're doing. And as a concluding note on that is that I finally began to have some success against Victor's pupils because I think I took that approach, but also because, yes, there is a value to being unconventional. There's a benefit on a chessboard of being unconventional. If you're very good, if you know what you're doing, but there is a downside. Often his moves were not the best moves. They were the second best move or the third best move. They had a surprise element, okay, which could sometimes compensate for it not being objectively the best move, right? But there's a downside to it as well. If you can figure it out in the time that you have, if you can find the weakness in that move, you can win, you can beat him. And so it's the same with the rule of law and the administration, right? Yes, he does these things, but there are weaknesses to what he's doing legally. The reason we haven't lost a case yet is because, candidly, he is sloppy in how he does things and how his administration rolls these things out. Travel ban, Daca, you name it, all these have weaknesses, but you need a fantastic legal team, right, who spends hours poring over these things and figuring out what that weakness is and being objective about it. And so that's a much longer answer and probably went way off from what you wanted, but it is how we think about it. Thank you so much for giving me a chance to say a few words. Have a great night.